Okay, so we are loading up the stream. You guys should be seeing this thing pop up pretty soon. As soon as you guys let me know, you can see everything and you can hear me. If you could just let me know, throw something in the chat. I always want to verify you guys can see it before I start going off on a lecture and no one can hear or see me, which has happened in the past. All right, everybody see my screen okay? Can you hear me? I don't know if you guys can actually hear me yet. Let's try it out. 1 second. Test. Can you guys hear my mic? Perfect. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how long the lag is today. Usually always a few seconds off. Okay, yeah, it looks like it might be about a 10 to 15 second lag between what I'm doing and what you guys see. But that's the way the YouTube streams work. Cool. All right. Hope everybody's having a good week. Haven't had a chance to look at many of the assignments yet. Checking out the other class, the Shading and Lighting 2 group today, but I'm going to jump into Shading and Lighting 1 tomorrow. I did reply to a couple messages I noticed that people had sent Wednesday night. So if you did send me a message regarding anything with 3.1, you should notice I replied back with some information about that. So I think that week 3 and 4 are honestly going to be probably the most entertaining projects you guys work on this month. It's not to say that the projects earlier in the month were not entertaining. I mean, you're learning software, but a lot of the stuff earlier is you're just trying to get comfortable moving around. You're kind of like, you're just crawling and trying to figure out how to do very basic things inside the software. But the cool thing about week 3 and 4 is that it's all about creating, beautiful, pretty images. We get to talk about color. We get to talk about light. How to produce clean digital imagery. It's something you're going to use throughout the entire program too, because I know this is jumping ahead a lot, but obviously by the time you guys graduate, you're all going to end up focusing on something. There's going to be some specialty that you guys decide you want to do. Like a lot of you are going to get into character animation. Some of you guys are going to prefer to stick with like environment modeling, maybe just environment modeling for video games, or you want to get into visual effects. So really, regardless of what you guys want to focus on, and that's something you're going to figure out, as you start going through the classes, this is something that applies to everybody. It's not there are people that do just lighting and rendering, but this isn't really something that just applies to those types of people. You can all use this information to make your work feel believable, make it more appealing, because as we all know, stuff that's just in the Maya viewport by default isn't really the most exciting thing to look at, right? Like it's gray, there's very basic shading. It doesn't really look realistic, but it's just what we use just to create things. We want to finally get to the point where we're seeing something that looks a bit more interesting. So we're going to do a couple things today. We're going to do a real quick demo just on some kind of tips and tricks on how to make RenderBand work a bit more efficiently. How do we go through the rendering process? And I know you guys have already got the basics down, like the very basics, just from doing the previous assignment. But I want to take that just a little farther and get into some ways we can make it a bit more efficient. So let's just kind of start with that. And then I think we'll use like the last half hour to do like a quick demo on some things you guys are going to be doing over the weekend with activity 3.3. 3.3 is probably one of my favorite assignments to actually check out this month. People usually have a lot of fun doing that one. So what I've done is I've already copied over a couple things to my desktop. So I've got the vehicle project, the same thing you guys did in 3.1. I'm just going to dive in here real quick because I want to just talk about a couple things that pretty much everybody is going to want to look into. And just like the previous live sessions, it's going to be recorded, just like always. I'm going to send out the recording. This time I'll do it tomorrow instead of Saturday night or Sunday morning. But we'll send out the recording so you guys can also review this information and you know use it to improve your work. All right, so the first big thing is, what do we think a render is? Well, a render is essentially the process of us converting things we see in 3D into a 2D image. Now, there's a lot of things that go into a render. There's quality settings. We have to think about what the camera is doing, what's the camera looking at, how does light interact with the objects, and when light hits something, what does that mean? Does the light hit the surface and certain colors are absorbed and certain colors are reflected back to you? Does the surface have is there a specular highlight? Like with car paint, is it shiny? Is there an iridescence to it? Does light pass through it like the windows? So a lot of things can kind of happen here. Now, if I look through, let's do the front cam. I think this one's a little more exciting. I actually might turn the wheels the other direction so you can see more of the rim. Let me just do that real quick. Okay, so we have our little vehicle shot, and we're going to try to do a render here. Now, the first thing I want to do is just go over a couple efficiency things that's going to make this a little easier for you guys to render. And I bet what some of you noticed is when you started rendering, and we can do this by a show of hands, how many of you, when you were doing 3.1, noticed as soon as you started hitting that blue R, or when you're maybe doing the big blue R to do the final render, you noticed that your laptop fan turned on almost immediately, and it sounded like this was a jet engine ready to take off. I'm sure everybody's fans went into high gear as soon as you started doing all the renders, because it's a really intense process. You might notice that if the laptop's on your lap, it gets very hot, it gets loud, it's trying to calculate a lot of things. And one of the other kind of big issues is when you're doing a render is that not only is the fan kicking on, there's a reason the fan's kicking on and it gets hot, but it's also using a lot of processing power. So it's really, really intense. Now, aside from burning your poor lap, if some of you are brave enough to put the laptop on your lap, it's also really frustrating because what you'll notice is that when the render's running, I bet some of you were noticing that just clicking around and doing simple things like moving the camera, going into certain panels, if you had like Discord open or other things open like Chrome, you probably noticed that all those other things that were open were just taking a lot longer to work because the render takes up so much of your computer's power that it almost makes it difficult to do anything else. And I'm going to show you a couple ways we can fix that. So the first thing we want to do is actually go into the My Preferences. Now, by the way, this is something that's not in one of the other videos. When I first made all the videos for the class, it isn't something I initially thought was going to be an issue, but it's something we've started to add in recently, just based on kind of the issues that people run into. So we're going to go into My Preferences. I'm going to come down here to RenderMan, and again, to get to the preferences, most of you guys probably remember this because you were in here back in the first week. Windows, Settings, and Preferences. So we're going to go down to RenderMan. So the plugin's already running. This wasn't here before, so prior to this week, this didn't exist. But now you have RenderMan in here, and here's what it looks like. Now there's a bunch of things in here you can customize. We're not going to get too deep into it. This guy right here, though, this is our main talking point here for the next few minutes. So render threads. If you kind of put your mouse over it, it'll give you a little description of what's happening. It says the number of preview or IPR rendering threads. A negative number means to use all but this many processors. So what does this mean? Well, basically what this is trying to tell you is that when you start an IPR render, now an IPR render, by the way, is this guy right here. So anytime you hear IPR, I'm sure you also notice there's a button right there called IPR. This is an interactive render, and it means when you're running a render that wants to update as you change things, meaning if I change a light's intensity, the render restarts and it tries to update what's going on, that's an IPR. It's an interactive render. It wants to change as you do things. It's updating constantly. And what you guys will notice if you go in here, if you've never been in here before, that your render threads are set to -2. What this means is if you actually do some research on your processor, and I think you guys all have the same processor I do. Actually, I can show you where to find that. If you go to your device manager, so we're getting deep in here. We're going to the device manager. I'm going to come down to processor, and this is what I'm using for my laptop, and I think you guys have the same one. I think you might have a slightly newer version of the processor than the one I'm using right now on my laptop, but it's probably pretty similar. So what I want you to notice here is we're using an Intel chip. It's an i9. You can see like the frequency and everything, but I just want to really point out how many of these threads there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 total. So what this is, the i9 processor, the Intel processor, and you can look this up online if you ever want to find out more about it, it is a hexacore. It's got 6 processors on it. Now the thing about Intel processors is think of every core as like a separate brain. So there's 6 brains in the processor. But these processors also use something called hyperthreading. And hyperthreading essentially means for every core, it splits it into 2, and so it tries to split it into 2 different halves. So what was 6 cores turns into 12 cores. It's not like you magically have extra processing power. It just means like let's just kind of pretend like with your brain, like you can only do one task at a time, like you can only focus on one thing. This means you're basically taking your brain and dividing it up into 2 separate things. Like half your brain can do one thing, half the brain can do another thing. So we're not going to get much deeper than that. Basically, you just want to know you have 12 brains that are trying to do something. And they're all doing different things. They're running Windows. They're trying to render the image. They're running your Spotify, playing music in the background. But there's 12, right? So we're going to remember that. Back here, this number, if it's set to -2, what this means is every single time you are rendering with this button, and we're just going to turn it on. Oh, actually, I have to make the layer visible. I don't think the lights are on. All right, let's just turn that on. We're going to hit the blue R again. So we're running an IPR render. This means that out of the 12 cores, or 12 threads, only 2 are being freed up to do everything else on your laptop. Now, you have to really think about that for a second. So 10 of the 12 threads are running the render. They're trying to calculate and put as much power into generating this image as quickly as possible. Now that may not seem like a big deal because you can probably imagine, well, if we're using that many threads to render the image is probably going to generate pretty quickly, right? Yes, it will do that, but the problem is when you think about what else is running in here, like we've got Maya open, I've got Discord open currently, my OBS software is running for the stream. I've got 2 Chrome browsers off to the side. You can't see, they're open, so I can see the chat with you guys. A lot of stuff is running. Photoshop could be open. And Windows itself, the operating system, that also takes processing power. So you've allocated only 2 of the 12 to do everything else. 10 of the 12 is the render. That's why things slow down, because your poor computer can barely handle anything because you've used so much of the resources just for this guy. So what I want you guys to do at some point today or tomorrow, if you haven't done it yet, because I have talked to a couple of you one-on-one about this, is go into the preferences, and I want you to change it to -6 and hit save. What that's going to do, and I'll just turn this off for a second, is it is now basically saying only 6 of the 12 get used for the render. The other 6 get freed up for all the other stuff you need to do on your laptop. Play games. I mean, hopefully you're not playing many games when the render's running, but whatever you have to do, browse the LMS, read something, at least you can do it, and it doesn't feel like you're you know, lagging severely the whole time. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. That's going to make a big difference. So pretty much every time I've had someone change it, because we've had a couple students where it was cripplingly slow, where they could barely move anything. Just by doing that one adjustment, it was like a night and day difference where they could actually move and do things in Maya without it freaking out constantly. So very, very important that you guys try to do that. Now, if you need more information about that, if you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, you can just hit me up on Discord and I'll try to explain that a little bit better. Now, the other thing is going to be specifically with this button in the viewport. So here's the other little trick. I'm going to turn this thing on, and I know we fixed the stuff in the preferences, so that's a big help. Now, the render probably isn't going to calculate as fast, but I really don't care because this is really not meant to generate quickly. It's just a preview. As long as I have the general idea of what's happening, I don't care that it's kind of grainy. I can still move around and get things figured out. The one thing that you want to be careful of is actually a button to the right. And I do talk about this in one of the videos, but it's something that is kind of glossed over very quickly. I don't think many people actually change it. So what is this thing right here? This is giving you basically a percentage of how much resolution this image is going to take. Now the reason this is important is because since we all have basically the same laptop, you guys probably all know we have a 4K resolution. If you don't know that you're running a 4K resolution, surprise, you are. It's kind of, I guess, one of the perks and kind of one of the cons to these Alienware laptops. 4K resolution sounds great when you're viewing videos, when you're playing video games, because you can crank that resolution up and things look amazing. The downside to a 4K resolution is a lot of softwares have a really hard time adjusting to the scale. So you've probably had problems where Photoshop, the text is very small. So some of you installing Maya may have noticed things look really tiny or they're too big, or OBS is scaled weird. So a couple softwares will struggle to scale for 4K. Nuke is one that's notorious for that. I do have videos that explain how to fix it. But one of the problems with 4K as well is what this poor thing's doing. So remember that when you do a render in the viewport, it's basing the size and the resolution of this off of what your resolution is of the laptop. So if you kind of remember that we're doing a 4K resolution, so just imagine there being 4,000 pixels across. Think about what percent of that is used for this image in the middle. I mean, I think we can all agree this is probably what, half the screen, like width-wise? This is a 2,000 pixel wide image, probably sitting in a 4K display. A 2,000 pixel image is massive for an IPR render. It's huge. And so I want you to see the difference here when I go between these numbers and watch how quickly this thing renders. Now I'm going to turn it off. We're going to go to 100%, and this is default, by the way, because a lot of you will probably not change this immediately. And I want you to look at the image and look at how quickly it tries to go through it. Now it's generating it, and it's working, and you can kind of tell it's very crisp, right? The detail, look at how sharp the details are between like the grill, you know, the corners and the trim detail around the geometry. Like everything looks really sharp, right? Which is great, but man, is it slow to update. So if just me clicking on a light, like if I wanted to change the light color back there, which is this backlight, let me go in the attribute editor. This is going to have to restart again because I just changed the viewport a little bit. But let's just say I wanted to change the color. Like I'm going to go in here and make this thing green. Just give it a second. You can see it's updating green. But see how slow it is trying to like spiral out from the center to re-render this thing? It's taken a bit, right? And that's because it's doing a humongous resolution percentage of the whole screen. And the whole point of these IPR renders is you want things to update quickly so you can very efficiently move through the project. Now, watch what happens. Let me restart it again because I want you to see this one more time. I'm going to restart it one more time here. Okay, so it's rendering. Just take a mental note of how slow that thing is spiraling out. And it keeps spiraling again from the center. Okay, it's pretty slow. Now watch what happens if I change this to 50%, half the width and height. Look at the difference of speed. See how much quicker that is? Now, obviously, it's a little more pixelated and it's not as crisp. But again, that's not the point of us rendering right now. We're not trying to get the final image. We're trying to make sure this is efficient. I want to hit those different things I need to do in the project, get in and get out. I don't want to be waiting on the laptop. And it gets even faster. If you think this is even too slow, you could go to 25%, 33%, only 12%. So 25%, we'll do that one. This thing is flying through the render right now. It doesn't look good, but again, I can get feedback really quickly. So with something like 25%, like if I did, you guys know I'm loving my split view, right? This little button over here. So what I could do with this is if I am running a render with one of my viewports, like I'm going to set this one up so I can kind of see the whole thing. This one I'm going to put the perspective. So I'm just doing my two cameras. One is the image I'm rendering. This is me just moving around, clicking on lights, changing things. I'm going to start the render. So it's going to render here, and it wants me to do something so it can update. I'm going to, let's click on the light and make this a little bit bigger. We're going to scale it up. I'm just hitting R and scaling it. And I want to move the light above the car to see if I want some of the green spilling on it from up top. So we're going to move it up. I'm going to tilt it and kind of rotate it down. I'm just using the same hotkeys you guys have learned about, W, E, R. So it's not very bright. I want to get more of that green. So let's just bump up the exposure and try to force that green to be a little more intense. I'm just playing around with light settings. These are all things you're going to do later in the week and going into week 4. But you notice how quickly that was updating it and how it was able to move things around pretty efficiently. That's because we're keeping this low. And we did that trick in the preferences to make sure it's not getting bogged down. So you're kind of doing a couple things at the same time to keep it efficient. That's really one of the most, I think, annoying parts for new people that do renders is they get very frustrated because it's so slow. And this is a way to fix that. You're trying to make this still enjoyable so you can do things, move around, change settings. I mean, it's supposed to be fun. No one wants to wait and just feel like it's pinwheeling constantly because you can't click on anything. So what I usually do, I don't go down to 25% very often. You totally can. Typically I like 50%. So if you change it, it'll just restart the image. I think 50% is kind of like a good balance between it's definitely more efficient than 100%, but it's not quite as blurry as 25 and the stuff that's lower than that. But I would definitely recommend that. Now, the other thing you can do, which is pretty damn helpful, is let me actually restart this again. We'll kick that back on. So you know how back in the first week with 1.3, you guys all remember that resolution gate button where you're kind of setting up your camera and it did that little gray box around it. So you understood what the camera was going to see. Now, eventually the camera is only going to capture this, but if you turn that off, see how the render is still rendering something out here? It doesn't matter if this is gray or not, it's still rendering on the outside. Now, should I be generating information for everything that's outside? No, I definitely should not. It's a waste of time. So how do we fix that? Well, with the IPR render in the viewport, you know how we were doing the percentages right here? If you look, it basically allows you to, I want to make sure my thing, I am offline. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I want to let that thing get caught up. Did you guys just lose me for a second? Looks like my OBS just kind of freaked out. Try refreshing the page if it just went out. Okay. Yeah, I just noticed on my end, it looks like it just kind of died for about 10, 15 seconds. What I was kind of showing you guys is this little crop button. So crop allows you to define where you want to render. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you hit the button, and it's like a little marquee selection. So what you can do is just draw where you want to render. So if we were doing a render and we only cared about the lighting in the back here, I don't need to render the full viewport. So you can click and drag a little box and see how the render wants to update inside of here. Now, when you draw a crop, you can click and you can still move it. I'm just single clicking. The crop window can be grabbed in the corner. You can scale it out. You can single click off it to get rid of it. You can click and drag again to update the crop. But you'll notice that basically, as I draw crop windows or move it around, every time I move it, the render updates. So it's a really cool way to spot check around something and get instant feedback. So I could put it here, if I was trying to play around with the light on the left side, and now if I change something, it only renders here. It doesn't do any of the other information. So one thing I do quite a bit, if I want to see the full image, since I have the resolution gate visible, is I'll often click and drag on the resolution gate box, like right at the border, like this, or at least pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll drag on that. And so now it only renders within the resolution gate, and it's not doing anything outside of that. So anything beyond this little square, it doesn't calculate at all. Again, it's all about efficiency, just trying to control where you're allocating your time to make sure things run pretty smoothly. Okay. Now, one thing about the crop tool is when you are using it, see how when I click anywhere, it's like that little cursor's up and it's acting like I want to keep redrawing the crop tool. So the thing that takes a little bit of time to get used to is when you get your crop down, if you like using this a lot, and you don't have to use it, but if you like using this, turn the button off. That's not going to get rid of the crop. It just means you can go back to selecting and clicking on things, and the crop will just hang out, and it just stays there until you delete it. Now, if I want to get rid of the crop, I just hit the button, and then I can just simply single tap just to get rid of it, and I can turn it back off completely, and now we're back to no crop window at all. Once you guys kind of play around it a little bit in Activity 3.3, I think you're going to feel pretty good about it. A couple of you may have already been using it actually, even in 3.1, because I think I do hit on it kind of briefly. All right, so we got through that. So, the last thing I want to show you, this is actually really important. Everything else was more of like just being efficient, like making sure it runs pretty quick. The other thing I want to go over really fast with you guys is pretty critical. There is a crashing issue that some of you will run into. And unfortunately, we haven't figured out what the issue is. However, if one of you run into this problem, not that I want anyone to have this affect them, if one of you runs into this crashing problem, there is a instructor or an artist that we have in our forum, our Discord channel. His name's David Hackett. You've probably seen him before. He's been in some of our live sessions. Actually, is David here today? He's often in our live sessions, and I wonder if he's in here. David, if you're here, wave. Drop an emoji. If he's not here, it's not a big deal. But David Hackett works for RenderMan, and they're trying to figure out what this crashing issue, what's causing it, because the instructors can't recreate it, but it happens to about 50% of the students. So if any of you guys run into this problem, if you can get in touch with David, he would probably very much appreciate having you connect with one of their IT guys so they can basically do a screen share with you and try to figure out why it's actually breaking. No one is really connected with him yet, so they're not able to figure out what is causing the issue. But I'll show you basically what's going on. I can't make it crash on my computer, but I'll show you the issue. What's going to happen is when you guys start making lights, like eventually in 3.3, you're going to be making a dome light. So what's going to happen is when you make a dome light for the first time, as soon as you go to the dome light in the attribute editor and you try to change some of the settings, a couple of you will get a message that pops up. This is something like fatal error. It's going to give you a little line like it's trying to save the Maya file, and then you can save it or hit OK or cancel. It doesn't really matter what you do. Maya is going to crash. It'll shut down. You're going to get very upset. You're going to open Maya back up. You're going to restart it. As soon as you make that dome light again and go back in the attribute editor, it will immediately shut down once again. It'll keep doing that over and over again. And the reason it's doing this, or the thing that's causing it to break, which probably seems very harmless, is this little guy right here. This teeny little icon is what's breaking it. Now, normally it doesn't look like this. Let me load in an image so you can see what it usually looks like, because I have it disabled. I'll just load in a texture so you can see this real fast. So we're going to talk about what this is, but I'm loading in an image for our environment light. It's a nice little beautiful scenic background. Incredible. It's actually blocking the camera, so let me just scale this up so you can see it. So it's kind of like we have a sky behind everything. Now, normally when you guys go in here, this little icon will kind of show you what the tool is you're using. Like it's a little sun, or if you're making a disk light, it's a little disk light. Like these icons here show up over here. This is what's crashing Maya. I don't know why. They look so harmless, but they crash the software. Not mine, but yours. So the way we've been fixing it, and I would almost recommend you guys do this on autopilot before you ever get to the point where you get, where it does start crashing. What you guys want to do is go into a brand new scene. So we're going to get out of this for a second because you can't actually fix this if you're already in the middle of a project, because you going into the area to fix it will cause it to crash. So you have to be in an empty scene file. And I have a video about this as well I can send everybody. But I want you to go into the Hypershade. So the Hypershade, which you have not been in yet, is this button right here next to the render settings. So we're going to open this up. Now when you guys first go into Hypershade, it will not look like this. It's going to look like, which one is it? I think that's over here, and then I've got the material viewer up here. I don't know if anyone's actually following along with me while I'm doing this, but this is what everyone's Hypershade usually looks like. It's one window, but there's a lot of like other sections inside of it. I don't like all this other crap, so I just want to delete some of these windows to make it a little bit more clean and organized. But inside of here, what I want you guys to do at some point today or tomorrow, kind of like with the other things we talked about, is you're going to go in the Hypershade in an empty scene, not one of your scene files, an empty version of Maya. And right here, this button is usually turned on. I want you to turn it off. What this does, this disables the icons from drawing. That is what's preventing the dome light from generating that little sun icon right there. If this is on, see how it clicked on right there? That prevents it from ever doing that. Now, let me delete this again. So again, it won't show up until this is turned on, so we want to make sure it's off before we ever get into any of our projects. And of course, it also means don't double click on the icon, because that will force it to update, and as soon as you force it to show up, boom, Maya's dead again. It'll keep shutting down. Okay, so let's just delete this one more time. That's part of it. Now, aside from that, what I want you to do is normally you see these little icons right here. These are different materials. This is things we're going to talk about in shading and lighting too. But I'd also recommend changing the icon view to a list view. It just means you can't see the icons, but since we're turning them off anyway, I think this thing looks kind of stupid. So if we go to a list view, it's just another sort of like a safety step we're doing just to make sure that icons don't show up on the Hypershade, because we're not allowing it to, because we're going to a list. They don't draw it all in the attribute editor. We're just like taking every precaution possible to make sure nothing breaks. Because I can tell you, it is the few people that this happened to before I understood what was going on, it was so frustrating. We're talking about Maya crashing 20 times in a night just because of this one little issue. Very, very annoying. But you guys, because you're here with me in the live session and you're all proactive, will probably not run into this problem because you'll fix it before it ever happens. If you guys run into any problems with any of that stuff, crashing, immediately reach out to me. I don't want you guys suffering through any of that stuff. I want to kind of nip that in the butt before it ever gets to that point. Okay. Whew. We did it. That was pretty much all the important like efficiency crashing stuff I wanted to hit with you guys real quick before we got into the project. All right. If you guys have any questions, just put it in the chat and I'll try to address that. What I'm going to do in the meantime, though, is let's move on to activity 3.3 and just talk about what we're doing for this guy. So 3.3 is going to be your first activity where you're making your own lights. And I'll show you what the documentation looks like. I'm sure a couple of you have already jumped in here and you've maybe at least like browsed through what's going on. Maybe you've downloaded some of the files. So our goal is to try to match a couple of reference images. We'll show you how to connect some of these up so they work. We're going to do some day renders. You're going to try to get something very close to this. So you're going to be matching like shadow angles. You don't have to do too much of the intensity, but it's really just making sure you know how to make the light, you understand how to put in the right texture for the light, and then of course you're just going to rotate it a little bit so the sun kind of looks like it's coming from the right angle. And a lot of you will get very, very close. A couple of you that are obsessive, like OCD, will probably spend a crazy amount of time nitpicking every little line until it's perfect. And if that's you, I congratulate you because you'll probably do really well at this project. We have a sunrise, the exact same thing. It's a different image doing the lighting, but it's the same process. Can we load it in? Do we know how to match the reference? Do we get the light angle right? Eventually, you guys will get it perfect. You're going to save out the render, and we're going to do that here in a little bit and turn it in. Now, the kind of fun thing, too, aside from these first three where you're trying to match the reference, I do have a couple ideas you can do for your own illumination. This is the part I really like seeing because I'm sort of taking my hands off the wheel and I'm letting you guys just have fun playing around with ideas. I've included a couple bonus images that I did. You don't have to match these. I'm just including them as examples. These are ones I just had fun doing. You can make your own colors. You can make your own. You can choose where you want the lights. It doesn't. You can have interior lighting because a lot of you opened up the doors already and the shutters. You can do interior lighting, exterior lighting. You can do complementary colors. You could decide to go like monotone where it's all kind of the same, hue. I want you guys just to have fun and experiment. And if you end up creating like 2 or 3 different images, you like them all, turn them all in. I would love to see what you guys come up with. So these are all things you're going to be playing around with over the weekend. And you're basically going to be just turning in your images. The Maya file, day, sunrise, night, and then at least one bonus image. If you turn in more, fantastic, but I'm just kind of grading one. Actually, yes, you could do that. So what Luke's talking about is if you really want to get close, he's talking about taking one of your renders that you finish when you save it, bringing it into Photoshop and dropping the opacity so you can sort of, it's almost like seeing through it a little bit to the image behind it, and it'll help you sort of kind of get a little bit of an understanding of like where the shadows are like not lining up. That's actually a really good tip. So you could do things like that if you want to go into Photoshop to see how close you were actually able to get on that thing. But if you're getting to the point where you're going into Photoshop to see the difference, there's probably a pretty good chance you're doing totally fine. All right, I use Nuke to compare it, but if you want to use Photoshop, it's all good. You can use Photoshop. All right, so let's try it out. I'm going to set my project to the environment project. It's the same thing that you guys were doing before. The cameras, you put the telescope in there. That's all I'm doing. I really hope this file has everything. I have so many versions of this project, I've lost track of which one is which. Please have the telescope. Oh, it does. Fantastic. I don't have to redo any of that stuff. Okay. Does this have my lights? It does not. That's totally fine. So I'm hopping in here, kind of at the point you're all at. I didn't open the windows up, but I have this open, which is fine, because I'm probably going to use maybe this one. Yeah, we'll do this one, I think, for today by camera 1, and we'll use that to render everything. So I'm in the project. I'm going to do the split cam, the little split view, where I have like the 2 different perspective cameras or 2 different cameras side by side. Let's do environment cam 1 for this, and for this guy, we're going to do perspective. So, and the reason I'm doing that again is because I want to see the image, but I also want to be able to work and move things around in my perspective camera, just like we've done before in a couple of the other projects. Now, I got the images open here somewhere. I think I already downloaded it. Yeah, let me just unzip this, and we'll start off with maybe the very first one and show you how we would get this to work. Okay, so from the download, I've got a bunch of HDR images. We'll show you how to hook these up. I have all my little bonus images, the day reference, night reference. You can just kind of click through these and open those up as you need. We'll start with day, though. This one's the first one. So I've just opened it up in the little image preview, and we're going to kind of set this here for now. I'm going to show you a way to kind of see this a little bit better. We're just going to scale it in. I'm going to make this a bit smaller. Yeah, so we'll maybe do something like this. I'm just going to throw it right there. We're going to go back to Maya, and I'm going to hit this button here to pop in the side. And I'm trying to get it so I can basically see Maya and the image at the same time. Now, I know some of you probably have a second monitor you have connected to your laptop. You can just throw this on the second monitor. That's also fine too. All right, so I can see it. I know we're kind of limited on real estate, but we should be able to figure it out. So we're going to bring up the documentation. I'll show you how to do this. So it says, all right, we're looking at the day reference. So what's the light source that we're using? Pixar Dome Light, using this image. Now, once we get that connected, it's not going to be perfect, but I want to try, I want to make a display layer, which we've done before, so I can keep each light separate, that we can turn them on and off really easily. And I want to get the intensity, color, light, shadow angle as close as possible. Now, thankfully, for most of the projects, you're not going to have to worry about the first two. It will just work if you rotate the light in the right spot. It's not too difficult. And once we get it looking good, we're going to produce a high quality render and then move on to the next part. So we're going to make the dome light first. So to make a Pixar dome light, what I'm going to do here and what I do in the videos is on the RenderMan shelf, all the buttons that have the little kind of arrow in the corner, those are buttons you can right click on. So if I right click, you can see we have a couple options here: Pixar Dome Light, Pixar Portal Light, and Pixar Environment Daylight. These two are a bit more advanced, and we will talk about those in some other classes, but we're going to do the Pixar Dome Light today. So I'm going to click, and just like you guys saw when I was doing that vehicle project, it kind of makes this giant white ball that just goes around everything. So it worked. If you notice that when you do the Pixar Dome Light, occasionally it doesn't scale properly, and it might look like a giant ball that's kind of hovering over the building. You are more than welcome to go to the scale and boost it up until it's big enough to go around the whole scene. It should not be blocking your camera's view to the balcony. So just make sure it's big enough to be on the outside. So you should be inside the Pixar Dome Light, not outside of it. Now the reason why it's white is because if you click on the light, and you can see this in the outliner too, by the way, it shows up like a little an icon, like a little node. You can rename it, but when you click on it, regardless, in the attribute editor, you can see there's intensity settings. We can change the color. Now, currently, I'm actually surprised it's even showing me that because there shouldn't be anything in here. That is very weird. I haven't even connected anything yet, and it's acting like there's something connected. When you guys make it, it probably won't show you anything here. Mine's loading the one I had up previously from the vehicle project. I have no idea why. But it's white because there's not really an image in it. It just defaults to a white color. What we're going to do is connect our image. So I'm going to hit the little folder button, and this is like opening any image or file like we've done before. We want to do the San Giuseppe Bridge 4K.hdr. And you can kind of see a little preview over here of what it looks like. We'll hit open and just give it a second. It should click, and we'll just close down the outliner so you can see this a little easier. Here we go. Beautiful, right? Can we all please move here like yesterday? So we have a nice little, pretty environment. We have the sun, which is back here. Here's like the backside where there's not much sun, but the sun is also bouncing off the building. Now, this will actually light up your scene. These are really cool ways to light up a project with hardly any work. So if I hit the blue R, it will try to render it. Now, what some of you may notice when you first do this is that it may not look like this immediately. It might have a weird grayish blue color. So one of the things that happens is when you first render something, like and you use a texture for the first time, RenderMan is going to convert this image that we loaded in to a .text file. Some of you may have noticed when I was loading this earlier that there was another file right below it that looked really similar. It just said .text at the end. This is a converted file from this one. So every time RenderMan uses some type of image, it is converting it to a better format for memory and performance. Yours will do this automatically once you connect it and just give it about 2 seconds. Once it converts it, it'll never do it again. You're good. But it's loading. It looks like it's working. Now I have the wireframe on, and that's kind of distracting. So let me just fix that real quick. I'm just going to turn that off. All right, let's push that back in. I'm going to get it really as small as I can, just so it's within the resolution gate. And let me turn that off and back on, because it will get kind of popped weird. There we go. Now watch what happens, because I've already changed the percentage. I got my settings changed in the preferences. I'm going to click on the light and hit E, and I want to rotate it. Now, one thing to be careful about, when you guys rotate this thing, don't click in the middle and do this. I mean, you can do it. You can do anything you want in Maya. No one's stopping you. What do you think would be the problem with doing this to the light? Because it's still technically working. There's a big issue, though, with lighting a project like this. You got it. Hey, it's David. This is the guy I was telling you about. David, I don't know if you were here earlier, but I was totally calling you out. I was trying to get one of the guys to connect with you about that RenderMan crashing issue with the icons, just so you can get in touch with somebody and hopefully we can troubleshoot this thing to get it fixed. Um, but he's totally right. This is bad reflections and inaccurate lighting because, um, oh, I'm jealous. I wish I had coffee. Uh, so with the light, you have to remember like the reason you're doing this light is because you're trying to simulate the real world. You have basically said when you tilt the world like this that your building is sloped at a weird angle. It means the ground is going up, the sky is no longer really above the scene, the sun isn't following the normal, arc through the sky. The building is everything you can think of with how light normally reacts with the world has been ruined. It's all busted. So we want to make sure we don't rotate it like that. So what I want to do is make sure the rotation stays at 0. The only thing you want to do with rotation is rotate Y. You only want to spin the environment around. You don't want to actually cause the ground to tilt. Don't do any of this weird stuff. That's very, very bad. So we're going to turn it so that way it just looks like we're putting the sun in a different position relative to the building. So it's only rotate Y. Now what you're going to notice is if I want to match the reference, see how right now it's clearly not even close? Like why is it so red? But if you just take a step back and think about it, where do you think the light's coming from? Like what light would be hitting this part of the building? Just turn the camera around and look at what is behind the wall, behind you. I wonder where the red and warm color is coming from. Maybe the giant red and yellow building right behind the camera. So what you're seeing is all the light that's hitting this is the bounced light coming from the sun, hitting the building. It's reflecting, bouncing off this, and then blasting the wall with this sort of secondary bounce of illumination. So the sun isn't even hitting anything yet. You're getting a bounced light. Now, where is the sun? Well, if you take a step back and you can see it, well, it's right here, right? So there looks like there's sun in here. So for the sun to come from the left side and do this little shadow to the right, we know the sun needs to be somewhere over here. So all we're going to do is rotate it and see how it updates really quickly because I changed some of my settings. I have the percentage down. So we're going to keep rotating it and eventually look what starts to happen. You can see it's barely starting to poke in. We're getting blue and look at that. That's sunlight. You will know when the sun hits it because the sun is a lot brighter than everything else in the map. We keep spinning it. See, there's that shadow, right? And from here, this is just a matter of you just looking at the image and playing around with the rotation. And you can see in this case, because obviously my camera is in the same spot because I made the image, but I know your cameras are all in slightly different locations. Do the best you can to line it up. If you want to kind of cheat a little bit or be smart, you could make a temporary camera that's in the exact same spot as this, or at least as close as you can get it. Do all your adjustments from this new camera that you just made temporarily, and then once you know the light's in the right spot, you can totally hop back to your other camera, whichever one you want to use, and do the final render there. As long as I can see the balcony, I'm not too worried about if your camera is a little bit different than mine. I'm not grading your camera, I'm grading the lighting, so not too worried about that. But really what I would do is just rotate it a little bit, and eventually I'll get that shadow to kind of hit right where it needs to. On the balcony railing. So I'm already pretty close. At this point here, like if you guys get here and you do feel like you're getting really close, you could probably kick off a final render and turn it in. So let's say we think it's good to go. How do I do the final image? Because this is not where we do the final image. This is our test. Let's turn it off for a second, okay? Now, one, I should be saving it. So let's do save as, and we're going to do environment. light display layer. So see how it works like it did with, you guys remember this from the character background thing where you put the little polyplane on the display layer. You're just doing this for the light source. So now I can turn it on and off when I'm done with it, make a new light, move on to the next part. I'm going to double click on the layer. Let's call it day layer. Okay, but if I want to do the render, I need to use this R button over here. So this is the viewport. This is the final render. Now if I click in the viewport, now see at the top when I click, there's a little gray, like a box that's kind of highlighting. So this is dependent, this button is dependent on which viewport you are actively working in. So if you happen to be in perspective when you hit the button, watch what happens. It's going to pop up the image tool. You guys remember seeing this before from like the previous project. See how it's an image, but it's not the right camera, right? That's perspective. So it's just in the wrong viewport. So we're going to stop it real quick with this. Let's try it again. We're going to click over here at the top, hit the R again, and just give it a second, and boom. Now we're getting the image. So I can middle mouse wheel back. I can left click to kind of move around. We can scale in the little image tool window. The last project, I go into quite a bit of detail with the image tool, so I'm not going to bore you guys with talking about everything in here. I'll let you guys just double check that. But we're seeing the final render. Now, this is the boring part of the project. This is where you just have to wait. There's the percentage. It's just going through its math, its calculations. It's trying to figure out where light's bouncing. Every little pixel in here, if I zoom in, all these little squares are trying to be calculated. So every one of those guys has all these little teeny dots in it. They're called samples. They're calculating the color of the surface, the reflections, whether it's a diffuse or specular reflection, things we'll talk about in shading and lighting too, where the light's coming from. So it does take a while to finish some of these different projects. It'll keep getting faster as it gets deeper into the render, because typically as it gets farther into the render, based on some settings that's built into render band sampling, it'll start cutting back where it allocates samples, and it'll just speed things up a little bit. It's always the worst at the beginning. Right around 50%, you'll notice it gets a little bit quicker. But I'm not going to do this whole render. Eventually it'll finish. You'll save it out. Now, the one thing you want to be careful about when you guys are doing final renders, I have a video pretty much in every activity where I talk about what you need to do in the render settings to produce a clean image. But I'm just going to show you my little kind of like cheat sheet for this class and the next class. There's a very sort of gray area between what's acceptable as like a grainy test render and what's also acceptable as like a high quality clean render. So I don't want you guys waiting forever for these things. Some of these images may take 10, 15 minutes. It's just the way it is. But I also don't want you guys waiting 2 hours for an image or getting an image created in 10 seconds, but it looks terrible. So normally when you guys are in here, the settings look like this, pretty similar to it. And if you're not sure if you've ever changed these, if you click on the right side of these attributes, there's a revert to default. That will revert it back to the default value. So you can do that on any of these guys. They can all revert. It's just a nice way to back up to like the default settings if you can't remember what it should have been set to, at the beginning. But what I want you guys to do for your final render, which is using this button here, in the max samples, just go to 256. We can push this way farther, but for what we're doing, we're not trying to produce some masterpiece. We don't need to go that far. We're just going to double it to 256. Don't change anything with min. Don't worry about pixel variants. These are more advanced stuff we're going to talk about way farther down the road. And don't change anything with the IPR. So the IPR samples, this is specifically for this button here. This is the viewport render. If you crank up the IPR samples and start playing around with these guys, all you're doing is making this render take longer to calculate. And remember, this is supposed to be a quick render because you're just using it to test things out. You don't want it to take forever. So we doubled that. Now down here, this is the other area I want you guys to focus on. So these are local samples that control the light quality, which is this, and the bounced light, which is indirect. BXDF is materials. We'll talk about that in the second shading and lighting class. All you need to do is put light, and indirect to 4. So we're bumping that up quite a bit. But that little adjustment here, these don't have nearly as much of an effect on the render time, but they have a huge impact on the quality of the image. This is a little more intensive for the render. You start cranking this thing up to like 500, 1,000, 2,000, you're going to see your render. It's going to be hurting. You'll be waiting a while. So this little guy right here, you can take a screenshot if you want. I'll leave it up for a second. So if you guys want to use the little snip and sketch tool, you can take a screenshot of that. I have it in some of my videos, but I'll just leave it here for a minute. But eventually, if you let it render, you'll save it out. It'll look very clean, and you'll turn it in as part of your project. Now, one thing you want to be careful about when you guys save your images, remember, because you're going to have a bunch of these in the catalog. I'm just going to click on the first one and hit backspace to delete it. When you save it out, make sure you're selecting the image you want. Go to File, and you're going to do Export File. There are other options in here which are very confusing, and they look like the right answer. Like Save Session is the one a lot of people pick, or Export Catalog, which will basically export everything. Export File is going to save out just this one image. Now, when I save it out, I want to show you the issue here. We're going to do Export File, and I'll just put it on my desktop right now. We'll call this day render, and that's fine. We'll day render 1, I guess, and hit save. Right, it's perfect, right? What could possibly be wrong? You can probably feel the setup coming. Look at the image we saved. Now, I know we could turn this in, but I'm sure most of you will look at this and immediately kind of be like, huh, that doesn't feel right. But for probably the last activity, we remember what this issue is. It's something in the image tool we had to turn on, right? What was that setting that we had to enable to fix the problem? Because if you don't change it, all your renders, when you save them out, will look like this when you view them outside of Maya. What was it we had to change? Because it looks right here, but something's happening when we save it. Bam. Yep, Presley nailed it. It's right here. We have, under catalog, burn-in mapping on save. This will disable every time you close out of the image tool. It's a little annoying. There probably is some way to turn the preset on by default, but we're not going to worry about that. Make sure that's turned on. As long as that's enabled, when you export your file, we'll do it again. We'll call this day render 2. Save it. And give it a second. There it is. 1. There's 2. So it's a very simple thing to not do. I can still technically grade it. I just have to bring this in Nuke and change the color space in Nuke. It's a whole process. Just make sure it's turned on. If you notice it's dark, it's very easy to re-save it. You don't have to re-render it. As long as the image tool is open, you just do it again with that checkbox enabled. Pretty simple, honestly. Now, basically all you're doing, we'll kind of wrap this up real quick, but all you're doing is really repeating this over and over again a couple times. So, oh, weird, it sticks for you. Is there any chance you have scripted that so it actually is always turned on? Mine always disables every time I close out of the image tool. But you're doing this again for sunrise. Just a different image, but you're just rotating the light. Eventually you're going to get this. Save it out as environment sunrise. The night one is a little different, so you're still doing another image. There's a kind of a brighter light coming from the top right. This is not like a realistic moonlight. It's more of a stylized effect, something you'd see maybe in like a Pixar or a Disney short. So we're kind of getting this little like feathered, kind of soft moonlight effect on the balcony. That is coming from this other light source, a Pixar rectangular light. Those are pretty easy to do. I can actually do this really quick. Let me just make a new one real fast. We're going to go at ludicrous speed. So we're going to do Pixar Dome Light, Attribute Editor, Folder. This is, was it Dawn? You'd think I would know this. It's my own project. Yep, Venice Dawn. Let me just load that in real quick. Okay, we're not going to do anything. Let's just get in there, hit R. Okay. I'm not going to rotate this, but you can kind of see looking at the night render. This is usually the hardest one for people. Um, See how it's very dark from the skylight and how most of the light's coming from this other light source? This skylight right now is way too bright. This is the only light source where you really have to change the intensity or exposure. And these are both totally acceptable to adjust. You can either cut this in half or drop down in exposure to like a negative value. So if I do like a -1, it just makes that light source half as bright. So this is every time you go down a stop, like if you go down to -1, -2, every full number that you go down or up, you are either halving or doubling the energy from the light source. So if you thought this was too bright, if I do -2, it's now half what it used to be. But we're going to go at -1. Once you kind of get like the sort of that shadowed part of the light pretty close, this is probably not too far off, we would make the other light source. And the Pixar rectangular light is this guy right here. The disc light's also very, very similar to it, but we'll make one real fast. It's going to be inside the building by default, but where you can just move it out. Hit R. We're going to scale it up. The setting in here under Advanced, you're going to turn on called Normalize. I talk about it a lot in the video. Basically, it just means when you scale light up, it doesn't get brighter. I have a whole rant where I talk about that. It's very, very fun. But I'm just going to move the light up and see how the light has a little pointy end, sticking with a pointy end, right? The thing's aiming this way. It's right now blasting out into nothing. We want to turn it towards the balcony. So let's just use our rotation E. We're just going to spin it. And if I turn it down, I'm going to have to make it a little bit brighter. But it is aiming at the balcony. I'm just going to click on the light and bump this bad boy up until we see it. So let's do 4, 10. I'm just making big jumps. Now see how when I went to 10, something happened? It is working. We just want to go a little bit higher. Let's do 14. So we actually are kind of getting something relatively close. And from here, the hardest part about this, which actually I'm not far off, this is actually a mistake. Whoops, I did not mean it to put it there that quickly, is getting the shadows to line up, which I unfortunately, or fortunately for you guys, have done very quickly. So if you're watching the live session, oops, you just kind of found where the light goes. Well, that happened. But you would kind of move the light around, and you can kind of watch how the shadows adjust to get like the shadows in the right spot. I just unknowingly put it right where it needs to be immediately. But it's a little too bright, so I could maybe go to like 13, 13.5. I'm just kind of messing around with the numbers until it kind of looks about right. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So you're now getting the night render. We'd save that out. I can't believe I just did that quickly, but there it is. And then after that, it's really you guys just having fun doing your bonus renders. And I'll show you my file real quick. I know we're going a little bit over, but I do want to show you my final one. I think it's this guy. Yeah, that's probably this one. This is what my final setup looks like. And I think I have all my lights on here. I think. Oh, yeah. So see how I have all my little display layers down here? Because I've been organizing it. So I have like day. Oh, of course, the thing's not loaded. Oh, it's not loading. It's in the wrong folder. Oops. But you can actually look through my different... the dome light's not going to load because I moved the texture in a different spot. But there's one of my bonus images here. I'll kind of click through them. It is... Here's bonus 1. Top light. There's a light inside back here somewhere. Right there. That's the warm light hitting the door. 2. Here's the second one. So see how I have like a warm light down here, something coming from above. If we come outside, there's that kicker down here. This little light is very kind of a warm tone kicking up. I have a light right here hitting the telescope to give it a little bit of an accent, and it's kind of passing through and bouncing down here off the inside of the balcony. And the dome light's here, but it's very, very dark. It's just barely giving me a little bit of a fill. This one's kind of fun. I had a fun time doing this one. This one's new. This one I have a couple different lights. One on the inside for like that really kind of interesting, like not lavender, but kind of like a purpley inside. casting, like a ceiling light casting down. I have a top light, give me a little gradient on the side of the building going down, and I have a green light over here just kind of kicking out this way. This one was just kind of me messing around, having fun with colors, see what I can come up with. And then 4 is this guy. Kind of similar to the last one. This one looks a little bit crazy because I have lights everywhere, but it's really me just kind of stacking lights together to try to get the different colors and accents to hit different parts of the telescope. I'm trying to make this the focus and kind of sort of accent the details around the telescope. But anyway, you guys don't need to go this far where you're making about a bajillion lights like I was doing. I just really like lighting, and I kind of got lost doing the project. But lighting is super fun. All right. Yeah, so that's pretty much what you guys are working on this weekend. It's honestly a really fun activity. So I think you guys are going to enjoy this thing, especially once you kind of get all those little things set up at the beginning, so RenderMan works pretty efficiently for you. You guys have any questions about any of that stuff that we went over? This was a doozy of a live session. Okay. Well, thanks, guys, for hanging out. We had a good turnout again. And like I mentioned earlier, if any of you guys have the crashing issue, if you on Discord could send a private message to David Hackett, that would be very, very helpful because I would really like to get that crashing thing figured out, and they would need to connect with one of you guys to see what's causing the issue. But that would be a tremendous help. All right. Thanks, guys. Everyone have a good night, and I will catch up with you guys either later in the week or talk to you next week.